Well, Browns fans, it wasn't the result that you wanted, but an exciting game at the very least on Monday Night Football. Browns fall 41-32 to the Denver Broncos as the Mile High City continues to be just a house of horrors for Cleveland when it comes to playing in that town. They just can't seem to get over the hump there for whatever reason. But you thought there were some moments tonight where they were going to pull it off, and we're excited to break it all down with you. I'm Spencer German, Anthony Moeglin, obviously alongside as we recap what was again a thriller in Denver tonight. And there's a lot of different places to kind of go here, a lot of different things to discuss. I on a normal night, Megs, I think we'd start quarterback, but I actually think we should start Jerry Jeudy.
I love that,
and,
dude.
and, and start on like a positive note too with this team because listen, there was a lot made of his return to Denver. There was a lot said from him, even specifically just about like what this game meant to him and how he requested a trade and he wanted to be somewhere where he was appreciated and felt valued. And the last 5 games for him now since Jameis Winston took over under center have just been pure brilliance. And it was just an exclamation point on top of it tonight with a performance for the ages. He becomes just the third Browns receiver to go for 200 yards receiving in a game, 9 receptions, 235 yards, the 1 touchdown, a 70-yard bomb. He actually would have had another long touchdown pass in the first half if Jameis Winston hadn't overthrown him. He was wide open again. He beat the Broncos secondary early. And I think it was also evident early on, Megs, that like he came to play. Like he looked like he was absolutely cooking their defense just with his route running. He was getting open. He was giving himself opportunities, and then Jameis just missed him a few other times. But man, what a performance from Jerry Jeudy in his return to Denver, and one that Browns fans, even in a loss, will certainly be celebrating and talking about for a while.
It was unbelievable. 9 catches, 235, 1 score. He sets the record for most yards for a player facing his former team.
They show that at the end of the game. Yeah,
unbelievable, man. And like you're so happy for him because even for me, my concern going into tonight for him was like sometimes you hype these things up like so much in your head, like all you're thinking about is, hey, I got to show out. I got to show out. I got to show out. And sometimes it's really hard to do, especially from the wide receiver position when you don't control if you get the ball or not. You could run 10 routes perfectly, be wide open, and the quarterback doesn't throw you the ball. And like, that's the way the night goes. But it was very obvious the Browns were going to give him the ball early. He caught the first ball of the game, right? That 44-yarder, literally first snap of the game. Browns do that fake play action to the left with that fake pitch. And it was supposed to go to Njoku coming back, right? He was covered, bang, Jerry right behind him, off to the races. And like my favorite part about it is now, like as we're learning Jerry Jeudy, it's really our sample size the last 5 games. He was the number 1 receiver last week in 2 feet of snow, and then tonight it was a perfect night against a former team, and he goes for 235. Like he has number 1 receiver in him. He is a dude, and like you don't have to worry about that. Like Cleveland legitimately, you learned some things tonight, and one of those is that Cleveland has a legit number 1 cat that they can build around.
Well, we talked about that pregame, and that was the thing I wrote about in my pregame column today was the exact idea that Jerry basically the rest of the season is trying to put together a resume that proves, hey, I can be a number 1 receiver in this league. Denver maybe didn't really get that out of me. Maybe some of that was his doing. Maybe some of that was Denver's doing. And just like the number of different quarterbacks that he had to play with during those first 4 years. But, or I guess 3 years. But yeah, like, oh no, it was 4 years. But yeah, I mean, I think that is the big takeaway from his performance tonight, other than, yeah, he kind of gets, maybe the Broncos get the last laugh, but he gets like the last laugh in terms of like the revenge against his former team and proving that he can be that type of player. Like this is where we're at. Like it is time to have a legitimate conversation about Jerry Jeudy and the viability of him being the number 1 wide receiver for this team and what that means for the Browns in the offseason, which is why these tonight and the rest of the season is important for him, because if he continues doing, I'm not saying he's going to go for 235 every game. Obviously that's crazy. There's only 4. It's only happened 4 times in Browns history. But for him to do this and put up these numbers he's been putting up, it maybe takes that off the menu as a top priority item for the Browns to address this offseason. Not to say they won't need wide receiver help. I still think they need to add to that room. But if he's giving you this, maybe you don't need to use a first round pick per se on a rookie, or maybe which I know probably scares some people because they don't think Andrew Berry can draft later round wide receivers. Maybe you don't need to invest the max of whatever budget you're going to have in terms of cap space on a number one receiver option. Maybe you don't need to go make some big swing trade for a number one receiver. You can maybe add a supporting role wide receiver, and that's a little bit of a different price tag depending on what you're trying to do. So that's a very valuable part of in a season where there's not a lot to play for. We know the playoffs are pretty much out of the equation now, or they have been, but they definitely are now.
We were dialed up, by the way.
I know.
We were dialed up.
You were ready. I know you were ready.
I had the path ready to go. We were about to have a good time.
but yeah, I was just gonna say, in a season with not a lot to play for anymore, Jeudy's performances and tonight are something to watch and can mean something for this team moving forward.
Well, Spence, think about it this way too. All right, tonight couldn't have gone actually much better for the situation the Browns are in, right? That game was fun to watch for 3 hours. It was a blast, up and down, back and forth. Jameis Winston, the whole thing. And you come out with a loss, and normally you're like, but it helps kind of improve your draft stock, right? And keeps you there. And talking about that receiver room, dude, it's all right, you can build around Jerry as your number one. Cedric Tillman has proven with Jameis Winston, with a legit quarterback, that he is a good, viable wide receiver. He's a big body. He kind of reminds you of a guy like Cortland Sutton, who can go up and make those contested catches and catching traffic and stuff like that. He's not going to burn past you, but he's reliable. And Elijah Moore goes for 111 yards tonight. No one's going to talk about that, but he had 8 catches for 111 yards. And frankly, before Jameis' second pick six, which is funny to say, I can laugh about it because I've done it before, but that catch on the sidelines, 3rd and 14 or 3rd and 12, and he toe taps perfectly on the sidelines right before the 2-minute warning. And you're like, what an amazing catch to get him up over 100 yards. So he was spectacular tonight. Maybe give him an extra, maybe you give him a 1 year or 2 year, something cheap.
Yeah.
Or you go and you take your top 5 or top 7 draft pick. And if you want to address it and you want to take a guy like, Luther Burden from Missouri or whoever it may be, and you could get hopefully a splash type of player, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. Or if you think, hey, it's more important to fix our run game, which is kind of where I would fall into it, and I'm sure we can talk about that at some point. You could take a top tier lineman. You could take a guy who changes your offensive attack right away, and the Browns are going to have that luxury because their only issue right now was the quarterback position for the first 8 weeks of the season.
Well, and we don't need to get too far down the rabbit hole of what to do in the offseason and where they're going to go and, what contracts look like. I'm glad you brought up Elijah Moore, though. He did have he like Jeudy, gets overshadowed because of Jerry, but like Jeudy, had a great game. And I think tonight was another testament in his regard that proved, the last 2 years that he's been in Cleveland, the quarterback's been a problem for his production as well, because when Flacco was in there last year, he started putting up some numbers. When Jameis has been out there the last couple of weeks, he's putting up numbers. I understand he maybe got leaped by Cedric Tillman, so he isn't getting quite the snaps that he would have been maybe last year this time of year. But still, that there's some evidence there, and maybe there is something to bringing him back as well as part of this receiver group. We'll see. Again, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole necessarily right now. That's for another time, that conversation. But yeah, and that I think actually segues nicely into the Jameis Winston part of this recap, this conversation from tonight, because you see what Jerry Jeudy does, you see what Elijah Moore does, and you can't help but think with the numbers that Jameis Winston put up, and I understand we're certainly going to talk about the 2 picks, 497 passing yards. It's a franchise record for the most passing yards in a game, passing Josh McCown, who had the record 457 in 2015 was the record. And it's hard not to watch this game tonight, and even in a loss, and feel like, man, if they had just started Jameis Winston sooner this season, who the hell knows where this team would be right now. I can almost guarantee you, though, that they would at least still be we'd be doing the thing that you wanted to do tonight, Megs. We would be flashing the in the hunt graphic and saying, well, hey, here's where they're at, and there's still a path. It's okay. They have 5 games to go, and if they win 3 out of the last 5. They're going to be in good shape. Like, that is where we would probably be if Jameis Winston had been the starter from the start of the season. And unfortunately, like, as the weeks go by, the problem on this team becomes more and more apparent. Like, it becomes blatantly obvious. And I don't know how anybody can possibly think otherwise, that the biggest problem with this roster this year was Deshaun Watson.
Yeah. Well, Deshaun has played now 4 playoff teams, right? Broncos, Steelers, Chargers, and the Ravens, right? And you beat the Ravens, you beat the Steelers. You could have won tonight, right? I don't think you should have won, but you could have won tonight. You had a kind of a stinker against the Chargers. So it's like, all right, against playoff teams, you're competing. And then you look at the schedule and you're like, all right, let's say he starts in week 1. Let's give the Cowboys game a loss just because you get blown out 33-17. Maybe that flips, maybe that doesn't. But the games that certainly flip, the New York Giants, you don't lose that game. You don't lose to the Las Vegas Raiders for sure. So there's 2 right there. That gives you 5 wins. And then you look at an Eagles game that you lose by 4 and a Bengals game that you lose at home by 7 because you couldn't throw the ball. And you're like, maybe one of those, let's say one of those 2 flips. So now you're at 6-5 and you're in it, dude. You're absolutely in the race. And you know, I think that while it was all like super good and fun tonight, and it's like we're enjoying watching fun quarterbacking, and like the reality of the situation is you can't drop a guy back. I don't care if you have Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, whomever. You can't drop a guy back 60 times and expect him to not turn the football over. Like 60 dropbacks is a lot for any type of quarterback, and he's going to do it. It is Jameis Winston. That's kind of part of his game. You tweeted it or texted it to me. Jameis gives and Jameis takes away. But yeah, I mean, it's super fun. And if he would have been the starter from day one, I think you're looking at a playoff team because this roster is really, really, really good, and they're competing with the other playoff teams in the AFC.
Well, and it's similar to what we said last year about Joe Flacco, right? Like, comes in, runs the offense more effectively, more efficiently, is slinging it around. The offense is moving. Just it's not as clunky. And I understand, like, Deshaun had the second half against the Ravens that everybody sort of held as gospel, and I get why he it was the first time he really those 2 games kind of back to back, that Cardinals game, that Ravens game, were the first time he really looked like really, really comfortable and confident as the Browns quarterback. So I get why we grasped at that and wanted to see more and thought there was something in there. But it's back to back years now where another quarterback is coming and taking over the offense, and it's looked better without him. And I think that speaks for itself at this point. And I think you're spot on. Like, if Jameis Winston's a starter at the beginning of the year, and I understand he has his warts, we're going to talk about the ones. It's hard not to think that maybe they're not a Super Bowl contending team because Jameis can't take you to that level. Maybe he's not good enough to get you there. But you would have to imagine they're still in the playoff conversation. They're still in the playoff picture at this point in the season. And so that's what's infuriating about it for fans is what could have been, right? It's another sort of instance of like what could have been if things had just gone somewhat differently or somebody else was under center, and that's frustrating. Now I will say, and this is where things are kind of interesting, especially with the Flacco comparisons. You got the full Jameis Winston experience tonight, and we've kind of seen it game by game. It's kind of played out. The Ravens game, he was brilliant. Chargers game, not so good. Saints game, he was brilliant, but they lose because the offense can't kind of do enough. And he comes up a little bit short. And then last week against the Steelers, really an ugly game, but the weather kind of, and he almost gave the game away. So you kind of got the negative side of the Jameis experience. And then he finished it off with a great touchdown drive that, you know, makes everybody sort of have amnesia about the bad things he gave you in that game. But now tonight you got it. Like, it wasn't over the course of like this game he's good, this game he's bad. It was like, one quarter he's good, the next quarter he's given the other team points.
One drive, it went drive by drive. He throws a pick 6 with under the 2-minute warning, and then takes the team on a 75-yard drive.
I mean, that was an awesome answer.
Surgical.
Awesome answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean you're dead on, and like I think the biggest point you made is that maybe the ceiling isn't Super Bowl with him. Like maybe that isn't like what you can expect. And what I do think though is that you go toe to toe with anybody because he doesn't care. He does not care if it's Joe Montana, if it's Jesus himself, if it's Patrick Mahomes, or if it's, you know, whomever. If it is, you know, let's say Bryce Young, he doesn't care. He's going to give you his all. And that's what makes you so bummed about this year, is because if this team's in the playoffs, if you're just in wild card weekend against Josh Allen or against Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, he's going to give them their best. And I think that's the fun part about Jameis. You'll never clean it up totally. You just won't. His picks tonight, the check down was horrible. Like Jason Kelsey talked about, it's like he had time. He could have just thrown it away.
He telegraphed it. He 100% telegraphed it.
And just like panicked, almost like he like freaked out. Like I shouldn't have it. Like you could see his internal clock like ringing, like going off, like get it away. And he just like forced it. Didn't need it. The second one was bad. The third one on the end zone was bad. So it's like all the bad things, but like you're in every game with number 5 playing quarterback because he doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing you can ask for, right? In a season that's gone up in flames, like just to have a shot in every game and still feel like you had a shot at the playoffs because of it would be nice. And so I'm not disparaging Jameis in that regard. Like he gives you a chance. It is wild, like how good he can look on in one instant, and then how just like egregious some of his throws can be in the next instant. It just doesn't it doesn't compute in my mind sometimes, because like a guy that has that talent and can do the things that he does and throw for almost 500 yards, like you'd think that guy is one of these great quarterbacks of all time, and for some reason like there's just too many lapses, and that's why he's kind of ended up where he's been in his career. It's kind of this journeyman bouncing around type guy, and it's weird. But I think the next part of the Jameis conversation, because again, the good moments, it feels like he can be the bridge quarterback for this team. Mm-hmm. The bad moments, I'm gonna quote Browns fans on this, like as somebody who thought they should try to bring Joe Flacco back in a backup past off season. The biggest argument against that from people was like, well, why would we want Joe Flacco back? He cost you a playoff game with 2 pick sixes. What happened tonight, Megs? I mean, it's the exact same thing. So I understand why everybody is, other than it not being a playoff game, it's the exact same thing. And so I understand why people were ready to anoint him after the Steelers win. And it's great when they're winning and he's giving you these great quotes and saying things after the game and making you smile, and it's all feel good and warm and fuzzies. And that's great. But it's why I have kind of been adamant, like, I can't fully commit to saying Jameis is the bridge quarterback for this team in 2025 and maybe beyond until I'm using each game as kind of my barometer for that, because like we just said it, he can keep you in the playoff picture. He can give you a chance, and maybe that's what's most important right now. He is the thing that ultimately makes him an option to come back next year. But it's also that, like, he's so volatile. Is that what you want at the quarterback position from a bridge option? And maybe that ends up being where they settle. But that's, if we're going to use that as an argument against bringing back Joe Flacco, I think it also has to be an argument against Jameis Winston in the same vein.
Yeah, and in one area I'd push back on with you, and I agree with a lot of things you say, but like we have to make sure we understand like when we bring in a bridge quarterback next year, because in my opinion, there's a lot of draft talk out there. There's one quarterback that you should go get, and it's Shedeur Sanders, and then second might as well be 100th, because they're just not; those aren't guys who are going to change a franchise. Yeah. The part that sucks is like you take the prime of your prime guys. You take the prime of your core, and you're trying to win with guys who are going to be journeyman quarterbacks for the next 3 years. Like, we're not going to get the cream of the crop, unfortunately, because you have to pay. You pay for what you get, right? And so Jameis will probably have to take a cheaper deal to stay here if he wants.
Well, and that's part of the conversation too. Is he pricing himself out even on a night where he throws 2 pick sixes?
Well,
is he pricing himself out of being Cleveland's quarterback next year?
So that's the other part of the question is like, all right, it was great he threw for 500, but was it also great that he threw 3 picks? Because then you're like, all right, we can point to that, and like you look at him statistically, his quarterback rating according to ESPN is 66. And that like takes him to like the lower tier of the league. And like, yeah, when we watch it, we're lighting up. We have so much fun. It's great. It's all the good things. But also too, it's like, all right, there's a lot. Like you go back to the Charger game, there's a couple there. You go back to tonight, there's certainly I can think of 17 points. It's 14 points that were directly pulled off the board by him because of interceptions, missed throws, and then you add 2 pick sixes, and you're like, there's 28 points, right? Like we can think of 28-point swing in the other way where the Browns are kneeling the ball out they're just milking the clock out with 4 minutes to go, and are in there winning a football game if you just play clean. I don't know, man. It's going to be one hell of a conversation when it comes to the offseason, because really what it's going to be is, hey, do you draft a rookie and try to find lightning in a bottle, or do you sign a journeyman guy like Jameis or whomever it may be? Like, I'm not going to say it, but like Baker Mayfield or somebody like that. He's not a free agent, but like a guy like that to bridge this thing, because, that's kind of where you're at right now.
I was just kind of trying to read through on Twitter here some of the commentary from post game and some of the things that were said. I know Jameis actually, I think, was just speaking, or was like maybe finishing up speaking. He actually apologized, he said, to his teammates for the 2 pick sixes tonight. And a direct quote that I saw on Twitter was that, a quote, "I'm just praying for the Lord to deliver me from pick sixes." So another kind of classic Jameis Winston line in defeat tonight for the Browns, who obviously fall to 3-9. I also saw Myles Garrett, who continues to kind of preach like, the goal stays the same. He mentioned that they're still trying to win. I saw Elijah Moore sort of mentioned late in the game on the McMillan interception that he sort of thought he had touched McMillan, but that they have to have sort of better execution there and make sure they do touch him down. And then the only other thing I think I saw from the Stefanski press conference was that he said the long touchdown pass to Marvin Mims Jr. wasn't a blown coverage, which didn't seem like it necessarily was, because like there was like 3 guys around him. It was like he split the safeties clearly in sort of cover 2, and that they just had to be better. So those are just some of the highlights from what I've kind of caught post game. But let's talk about the defense for a minute, Megs, because listen, I did think that they played well in spurts. I mean, let's be honest, like they're handicapped 14 free points from the Jameis Winston pick sixes. So that doesn't help your cause there. If you take the 14 points off the board, you're talking about a game that feels much different. They only scored 27 points, which is still a pretty hefty number that the defense gives up. But the Browns are in position to win that game if that's the case. But I there were some standouts. I thought Myles Garrett, even though he didn't register a sack tonight, he was getting some pressure. And I thought the first interception that Bo Nix threw was forced because he was bearing down on him, made for a rush throw. And then Denzel Ward's performance is going to get lost in the shuffle tonight. That dude has been phenomenal all year. He leads the league in pass breakups. He forced that first interception with the diving play he made. I mean, that dude is balling out on another level this year. I guess I shouldn't say another level because we know he's good. But like on a team that has a very expensive roster and is going to have to probably make some tough decisions on like who can stay, who can go, what contracts are we going to try to move off of this offseason, he is proving to be worth every penny. Like very much still in his prime. Not a concern for this team whatsoever moving forward. Like he's been brilliant this entire season.
Dude, literally the only concern with him is that it feels like he's built out of glass. Like every time there's contact by him, it's like, please get up, please get up, please get up.
Well, and then he's in the locker room constantly. He's in the booth room constantly.
Always worried about concussions. He's getting the roller out on the back of his legs all the time. No, but you're so right. Like that first interception was like, all right, the boys are playing. Like Denzel, obviously in coverage, right? Deflects that thing up in the air. Greg picks it off. I thought, you and I were texting about it. We talked about it in the pregame. MJ's had a rough year kind of just all together. And they were kind of picking on him a little bit with Cortland Sutton, but he frankly settled in and the Browns were playing fine. And that big long touchdown is really what sparked things. Like Denzel missed a pick by, dude, I'm not kidding you, 1 foot. Like 1 foot, he was leaking over. I'll do a show on it tomorrow where we'll break that play down specifically.
You're talking about the Mims one?
The Mims, the 93-yarder.
I just looked up. They just showed it on the TV, and you're right. Like he dives across there and almost makes it crazy.
I'm telling you what, like I thought live, like he leaked over. He like they called it a fold, right? Where he's playing like a deep third or a deep quarter, and then he just kind of folds over the top and goes to make a play. If he's one step in front of that, he picks it off. Like it's an interception and it's potentially a pick six, or not a pick six, excuse me, but an interception. It's certainly not, a 93-yarder, and it's probably a PBU. But regardless, like, he's this close away. But the problem is with Jim Schwartz defenses, and tonight, let's tell the truth. They gave up 28 points, right? Like, that's what they gave up, with the 2 pick sixes. So the problem with him is like the big plays. It's like you play good, and it's just a ticking time bomb until they break a 90-yarder, or they break a 20-yard run, or a screen play because you're in man coverage, or you get one guy gets blocked and the run goes for longer than it should. Like, the big plays are the problem with Jim Schwartz, and it's so easy to scheme it up because it just frankly is man-to-man coverage stuff. It's really easy to do,
and that
they're getting used to it.
Yeah, I mean, and that didn't feel like it was as big of an issue last year. Like, year one of Jim Schwartz everything went smoothly. It felt more like the Joe Woods sort of defenses this year, where they're giving up the big plays. There's miscommunications on the back end. There's a lot of missed tackles that lead to then like a guy breaking free, like you said, on the screen plays. So yeah, like, you're not wrong. And those are problems that sort of persist. The defense they weren't their best tonight, but I think like tonight's loss ultimately feels like the pick sixes are what cost you more than anything that the defense did, because they still gave you a chance. And I did think they made life difficult for Bo Nix at times. He didn't, for a guy who's been sort of trending and putting together, more and more solid performances and sort of staking his claim to being in the rookie of the year conversation with Jaden Daniels. I thought he had I think he kind of took a step back tonight in that regard. He only completed 51% of his passes. Yeah, he had 294 yards, but a lot of that comes in that 93-yard touchdown pass. The one touchdown, he had 2 picks, and he sort of forced him into some inadvertent throws and errors tonight. I will say this, and I texted you about this. I see a lot of a certain former Browns quarterback in Bo Nix. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Like, sort of, they like to get him out sort of like on a little bit of a boot, get him out of the pocket so he can kind of make plays downfield. He has the running ability. He's kind of a stronger, more built, bulkier guy. Like, I don't know. And yet he's kind of has that gunslinger mentality though, where he's like throwing it up into some iffy coverages and taking some chances. It felt like flashbacks to 2019, 2020 with Baker Mayfield.
It's Baker Nix, man. That's what it is, or Bo Mayfield, whatever you want to go with. But the other thing too is he freaking rips the football. He throws, he throws the shit out of the football, because I mean, it comes out of his hand. It jumps out of his hand. The one that I think of exactly, like, probably was when you texted me. It was when they were backed up in the end zone. Instead of just dropping them straight back, they did that half roll. And it was such Baker Mayfield, where he had a running back 2 yards in front of him. And instead of throwing it to him, he like took this 2-ball, which is like you have to get it up and down over a reaching linebacker, to Cortland Sutton like 20 yards down the field, like significantly harder, and he ripped it perfectly. And then like 3 plays later, he like rolls to the right and throws it back across his body to like somebody else where it should have been intercepted. You're like, what are you doing, dude? Like, no. Go back and do the other things that were really good. It is Baker Mayfield vibes for sure.
So the Browns fall to 3-9 on the season with the loss. They obviously take on, it's a real quick turnaround and rematch with the Pittsburgh Steelers next week. I'm sure there'll be some emotions. I'm sure Nick Chubb will get asked again about, now that he's going back to Pittsburgh, what that's going to be like. And I'm sure he'll give very non-answers like he always does. But certainly another big game awaits, despite the fact that they lose this one. And the other thing I'll say, Megs, we've talked so much about this team not quitting, or how they go about not quitting and what that means for Stefanski and his job security, which I think isn't really even a question at this point, but some people always bring it up. But like, this was another game where it's pretty obvious, like, this team hasn't just like thrown in the towel. And you got Miles, like I said, saying post game that he the goal is still to keep winning games. Like, it doesn't feel like this is going to be an unraveling situation for Kevin Stefanski, where the guys are just going to quit on him and he's going to lose the locker room. Like, they're playing hard. I think that was on full display again tonight. Like, you don't get into a shootout game like that if you're not playing hard and trying to win. So that's maybe one of the most encouraging things to come out of this game, even though it's another loss for the Browns in a season that has not gone the way anybody's hoped.
And I'll keep these 2 points short too. Here's your last 5 games: Steelers, Chiefs, Bengals, Dolphins, Ravens. 4 of those 5 teams are playoff teams. One of those is your rival, Cincinnati. So it's like you can play spoiler to a lot of teams' seasons, or shake up the playoff picture, or knock Kansas City out of the first overall seed, whatever it is. You could do a lot. You can knock you could knock Miami out of the whole thing when they come to town. So that you
were about to say Baltimore. There's Baltimore's lost a couple games here. There's a chance Baltimore could fall out of the playoff picture to a point where that last game of the season could be deciding something for them.
What if Baltimore and Los Angeles are fighting for the 7th seed in week 18, and that's a Sunday night football game on January 5th? It's like, holy cow. Yeah. But I'll sign me up for that, dude. Sign me up for Jameis trying to knock Baltimore out of the playoffs. That's a real world thing. And, these guys are going to keep fighting. And then, next week is going to be awesome, right? You're going to we haven't won in Heinz Field since it feels like I was born. I don't think I've ever seen a win at Heinz Field. And last week, we beat them in the snow, and then they give up 310 yards passing to Joe Burrow, on Sunday. So it's like, hey, the things we're doing good right now, we can continue to do well against the Steelers next week, and you're going to be in position to win at Heinz Field, something nobody on this team, Myles Garrett included, has ever done. So, there's your motivation right there.
Yeah, Pittsburgh obviously has been just we mentioned Denver being a house of horrors. You can say the same thing about Pittsburgh. Browns have won there just one time since 2003. And it was the playoff game that we all obviously remember so well in 2021, I guess the 2020 season, but the 2021 playoffs. It's been even harder to win there than it has been in Denver. And so, it's at this point for this team, it's little things. It's things like that. It's getting a win in a spot like that. It's knocking teams out of the playoffs, whatever it might be. And in some ways, if you're a fan who's sort of leaning into the idea of draft pick or draft, placement, draft positioning, tonight was exactly what you wanted to see, right? An exciting game that gives you something to cheer for and be happy about, but ends with a loss so that you still end up in, the top 10, maybe even eventually the top 5 in terms of your pick.
Dude, imagine if we were 6-4, how hard of a watch that would have been. If you're fighting for it, I would have jumped out of my window into the street, into the the snow. If you're in Eastern Cleveland, you'd have been rather shoveling snow than watching that, because that would have been too much to handle if we were in the playoff. But
that is the other angle of this, is we talk about if Jameis had started at the beginning of the season and they actually were still in the playoff conversation. A game like that is a bigger heartbreaker.
Spence, I literally just had fun tonight.
We're sitting here smiling, we're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Browns.
I would have been in tears. I'd have been.
Yeah,
you'd have been
that's what I'm saying.
You'd have been like, hey, dude, we're going live, and I'd have been ignore.
The season, because the season's been just a disaster. It does make it easier to kind of just accept the results every week, because it is what it is, right? Where the team's at, but yeah, it's an interesting spot. But
the last little weird thing of tonight. You ever been to a game in Denver?
I have not. No.
All right. Could you pick up on the incomplete cheer they do after every incompletion?
Yeah, I did hear.
Okay, I've been to one game. Okay, I'll never forget it. I was the day the Browns lost to the Jets. The Joe Flacco.
Oh, the Nick Chubb scores, and then they 2 minutes to go. They
never forget it, dude. I'll never forget it. We leave my buddy's apartment where I was out there for a work trip, and we leave my buddy's apartment after Chubb scores. We're like, we win, awesome. We wear our Browns gear to the game. By the time we get to the stadium, we had lost, and then I got out, watched it was Texans versus the Broncos, and they do that incomplete cheer after every incompletion. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever experienced at a sporting event. And no hate, and maybe it was because I was jaded that day and just angry, but it's one of the stupidest things. If there's Broncos fans watching us right now, I'm sorry, but not really, because it is the dumbest cheer I've ever heard of. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, you're okay. I am bummed I didn't get a chance to be there tonight. I was looking forward to maybe making that trip and experiencing Denver for the first time, doing some of the cool things around there, but it wasn't in the cards, obviously. expensive travel weekend for if you were unaware. It was just
Shocking.
Thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
there was just a lot going on. Wasn't in the budget, and with the season being what it was, we prioritized the combine. So you'll see us in Indy again this year.
Your trip home
good news.
tonight in this scenario is much better than your trip home if you would have been at the stadium.
Dude, I would have been on my way to the airport right now and just like hanging out, waiting until my whatever 6 a.m. flight. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I get a chance to just kind of lay low and eventually make my way upstairs just to go to bed in my own house.
Yeah.
So guys, appreciate you jumping on in with us, especially so late in the evening on a Monday as you're, just getting back to work after the long weekend. As always, we encourage you to find more content like this at the Cleveland Browns on SI YouTube channel. No post-game press conferences tonight with us not being there, but we will have stuff throughout the week. I know Kevin Stefanski is going to speak via Zoom tomorrow afternoon, and then he'll speak again via Zoom with some players on Zoom on Wednesday. And then we'll have your sort of normal Thursday, Friday stuff as well. So plenty of content to come there. And of course, plenty of content for you over at si.com/NFL, where we were covering the game tonight for you. I got my takeaways. I'm sure we'll have plenty more stuff coming up for you in the morning, just about the record-breaking performances, some of the things that transpired throughout the game tonight. So look forward to interacting with you guys that way as well. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Spencer German. We appreciate you following along and being part of the conversation tonight. And be sure to keep on following along with all things Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns on SI.